Okay, Divya, now we are live
Yes.
now.
Yeah. Namaskar and warm greetings to one and all. I, Divya Bhanot, on the behalf of Ramanujan College, extend my hearty welcome to day 5 of the 2 weeks online refresher course in psychology organized by the Center for Psychosocial Resource Development and Training in association with Teaching Learning Center under the aegis of Ministry of Education, Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. Namanti Falano Vrikshah, Namanti Gunto Janah. One of the most learned and experienced, yet one of the most humble personalities I have been fortunate enough to meet in my life is none other than Professor Girishwar Mishra, the former Vice Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi International Hindi University, Wardha, Maharashtra. A great scholar, a terrific writer, an insightful critique, an influential columnist, a dynamic leader, and a well renowned academician. Sir's contribution to the growth and development of psychology for more than 40 years in the field of social psychology, human development, self and affective processes, cross cultural and indigenous psychology have been phenomenal and acknowledged worldwide. Sir, it is a matter of immense privilege for me to invite you to the platform, and may I request you to kindly enlighten us with your unique perspectives and provide insightful directions to our understanding of the field. I now request you, sir, to kindly take over.
Thank you. Uh, I find this an opportunity to interact with young minds who have committed to the growth of psychology as a field. Psychology has uh, about a century in modern India. We know that it started with establishment of a department at Calcutta University. Today, I plan to look at the developments that have taken place and the kind of a struggle that psychology is undergoing, the challenges that we face. So, the main focus of today's discussion will be the issues and challenges within the field of psychology. Psychology tries to investigate, explore the intricacies of mind and behavior. I think if we go to the history of the discipline, we will see that there has been continuous movement between the inner and outer. If you focus on early developments, you come across understanding of processes which are more concerned with consciousness, the total individual. And gradually, the focus has shifted from inside to the outside. The external behavior became the focus of analysis. We are familiar with the revolution that took place with Watson when behavior became the sole goal of psychological investigation. Now, this was adopted as a strategy in the journey of psychology towards positive science, a science which studies external reality. We know that significant that it changed the whole approach of analyzing. Even inner processes were being subjected to similar analysis. If you look at the technology, methodology, the procedure that has been adopted by psychologists, we will notice that you try to convert the inner, the experiential, into something which is observable, which can be quantitatively assessed, which can be manipulated, and you have assistance from quantitative methods. So with the use of experimental, observational, and quantitative technologies, we try to study almost all aspects of behavior and mental processes. So we have been trying to map a variety of things. And if you look at the growth of psychology, you will notice that it has taken place at the level of individuals' behavior, at the level of group analysis, at the level of other higher levels of analysis. Contrary to this, psychology has also made move in the direction of biological neural processes. It is reflected in various attempts in neuropsychology, where we have models to study at micro level, and there are attempts to bridge the gap between observable behavior and what is happening at the level of biological functioning. So, biological, individual behavior, and if you want to call broader level, social behavior. So, social, individual, and micro level biological processes. You see the three levels of functioning. And there is tremendous growth in all these levels of analysis. So the level of analysis is one challenge. And how we can relate the three. We don't have any specific grammar to relate the three levels of functioning. And even the mapping is not complete. For instance, you find certain kind of behavior and you call it aggression. You give the name that this kind of behavior is anger or aggression, whatever you want to call it. And then you try to correlate it with what is happening in brain, what is happening at subcortical level. And you see these correlations, and sometimes you find that, well, changes at one level leads to changes at the other level. So there are experiments where you manipulate or provide extra stimulation, or there are brain lesions, and in some cases in human beings, and you see corresponding changes in behavior. You find to make sense, you try to make sense of the correlation that is happening, that is evident at behavioral level and also at biological level. But still, the connection is not very clear. Now, there are some difficulties when we try to relate different levels. One difficulty, is that we often try to accept reductionism as the answer. We try to reduce the complex levels of functioning to simpler levels of functioning and try to explain that on the basis of that. It may be a convenient way, but it often creates many problems. So one issue which is before us is that how to relate the different levels of functioning and how to take into account, while explaining behavior, you have to take into account these different levels of functioning. What is their interrelationship? That is one difficult issue which psychologists have to address. People have tried to divide their job, so one may be happy and satisfied with behavioral observation, and you try to see the connections across different domains. So you have one measure of aggression, one measure of anxiety, you have something about stress, you have something about pain, and you have a performance measure, and you correlate all of them, and you try to figure out what is the relationship. So you forget about the physiological level or biological level or social level. So there is division of labor and you focus just at one level. Now that limitation is there, that you can't go beyond that, but you try to make generalizations for other levels also. So this is a theoretical question. How we are going to relate the biological, individual, and social level of analysis? I pose this question before you. And when you plan your studies, you try to see how these relationships can be sorted out. Then there is another issue towards which we need to pay attention. That is that we often try to talk about culture. And we are different models of culture, different meanings of culture. And if you go to the published literature, you will see that culture is treated in so many ways. And simply saying that this is the effect of culture, influence of culture, or variation because of culture, what is the meaning of that? To share with you certain amount of caution that how we treat culture in psychology. This is very important. At times we become very happy when we compare two groups and say, oh, there is cultural difference. And we attribute the difference to culture. If you look at the different studies which are published in journals, you will see that culture is treated at times mere geographical variation. So you have Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, three different countries, right? Before independence, there was just one country. So one culture, now you have three cultures, and you can compare that. You can report cross-cultural differences. So political, geographical differences are there. There are also cultural differences. It's a big issue that how we are going to treat culture. We sometimes compare people living in two different regions and again call the difference as cultural difference. You can have rural, urban, and you can call cultural difference. It's a big issue that how to understand the role of culture in psychological research. Why I'm saying this? Culture is actually not treated in psychological research in appropriate way. This is a big challenge. We have a mindset to understand psychological processes. On the one hand, we have a set of variables with the help of which we explain, and there are certain variables on the other hand, and they have to be explained. We, from undergraduate level, learned that there are things which are known as independent variables, predictors, and there are certain variables which have to be understood, which have to be explained. They are dependent variables, criterion variables. Good. And you are the person who decides what will be put under this category and what will be put under this category. Now there is another move. We have introduced two variables. One is moderator and the other is mediator. So A and B are related and there is a third variable outside and that influences, you call it moderator, and you have a statistical way to understand the role of moderator variable. Or you have mediating variable, that A results in something and that mediates between the A and B. So that will be called mediator analysis. You do that, fine. Again, you decide what is mediator, what is moderator, what is independent and what is dependent. So it is your theoretical, way of organizing the variables and processes which ultimately matters. What you are going to put here, what you are going to put here. So it is your theoretical understanding which is the primary consideration in organizing your empirical work. Now, where to put culture? And I am raising this question because now it has become fashionable to talk about culture. Earlier, culture had no place in explaining various things. It does not mean that culture was not there, but cultural variables were not included in analysis, or they were redundant, or they were given some other name. Now, where to place culture and how to place culture in our research, in psychological research? This has been a very serious question. Particularly, the reason is that culture is a very broad variable, if it is a variable. Culture is also used as a context in which behavior takes place. And as I have already mentioned, that your caste, your language, your religion, everything is considered as part of culture. So it is very difficult to understand culture I'm reminded of one definition of culture given by anthropologist, psychologist Herskowitz, who long back mentioned that culture is man-made part of our environment. So whatever is man-made, your attitudes, thoughts, your behavior, whatever is man-made, and it can be material. You have Taj Mahal, or you have Qutub Minar, or you have a Grand Vishwanath Temple, or Ram Mandir, whatever it is. All that is part of culture. So people think of material culture. Then there is also a category called subjective culture. Some people also have a category called projective culture. So again, culture is taken in this way. There is another group of psychologists are called, they prefer themselves to be called as cultural psychologists, and they consider culture as meaning system. Meanings which are shared, practices which are shared. A group or community shares certain meanings, shares certain practices, practices of eating or greeting, there are so many practices. And it is cultural because it is shared. Many people use that. And it is the meaning which is more important. So the shift is from objective reality to the shared meaning. So understanding this meaning becomes very important. And cultural psychologists like Richard Schroeder and others, Brunner, they think that what we call psychology or psyche and what we call culture, they are not totally separate. If I use the phrase of Richard Schroeder, he says that culture and psyche make each other up. That is his statement. Culture and psyche make each other up. We live in a world of subjects and objects, and there are subject-dependent objects and object-dependent subjects. That is the view of cultural psychology. So, the independent and dependent variable kind of relationship does not hold true. What is dependent becomes independent, and what is independent becomes dependent. A book is because there are readers, and there are readers because there are books. So books constitute readers, teachers constitute students, and students constitute teachers. So there is interdependent relationship between the two. We need to recognize this. That is how meaning is created, shared, and distributed. And it changes. I want to emphasize this point that you can't fix that, well, this is one culture, this is another culture, this is another culture, and that will be true for the whole period. यह कोई शाश्वत categorization नहीं हो सकता. It can't be fixed. It is very difficult. It's very dynamic. If you look at the meaning of ancient India and go to Bangladesh and go to Pakistan and go to India, you will see three different interpretations. How they are using past, how they are constructing their separate identities. What is being taught there in schools, you can find these differences. Before independence, all these three areas were joined in, and they shared same identity. But even that identity is being described, distributed, interpreted in different ways. It's very intricate and complex matter. It is so crucial. One has to recognize these dynamic factors which are involved in understanding cultural processes. I want to emphasize this because once we call Indian and Western, these are very broad categories. They do not make much sense. They work at a meta level and they are meaningful to the extent, if you share that, then it is meaningful, then it is cultural. It is very important. What does it mean? I want to emphasize this and I want to request you, whenever you use cultural variables, try to ensure that it is also shared by the people. For example, if you compare, for example, males and females, and you compare the response, and you draw a conclusion, this is gender difference or sex difference, whatever. But it is important to ensure whether the person who has responded also believes in feminism, sex role orientation. Simply people are coming from village or coming from urban area, you compare and find difference. Whether they consider themselves as rural people, as villager, as urban, these are mere addresses. You are comparing addresses. Unless you decode, unless you establish that independent variable, a person coming from village has that village orientation or not, or a person who is coming from urban. I mean, it is very easy to collect data from city and collect data from a village. But whether they subscribe to the view of life which you consider, because you are going to explain that on the basis of that worldview. They are responding because they are villagers, and they are urban people. But whether they really subscribe to that or not, in experiments, we have a term called manipulation check, where you establish whether the manipulation that you have done has really taken place or not. When we study cultures, we hardly do that manipulation check. We compare rural, urban, boys, this, that. We hardly go to understand the cultural differences. You need to establish that. That is one important consideration. We need some extra data to establish that these groups really differ along variables. Such variations cannot be understood unless we understand what it really means. That is one thing. And second important thing is that the relationship between culture and psychology is very dynamic. Once upon a time, we did not have computers. We had great, very large size computer, a big computer of a room size, a very giant machine. I remember of 1970. I had to do an analysis and I had to come to Delhi, and it was a big computer. And there were cards on which the data had to be, coded, and those cards huge. So if you have 1,000 size of sample, so 1,000 cards were prepared, and those cards were put in that computer, and all that happened. It was very difficult to follow. Now you have your PC and you process everything so quickly. The situation is very different. What I'm saying is that now the culture has changed because of the introduction of PC. And PC has become part of the culture. So, if you read literature and memory, you will find encoding, decoding, you find retrieval, right? All that vocabulary comes from computer. So what was there in the culture has modified your psychology. Your hardcore psychology is modified by what is happening in culture. It is not one-way affair. Entire cognitive processes, the whole domain is being studied through the computer model. What is true? Mind has created computer, and computer is being used to understand mind. That is happening. And it is working. To some extent, it has helped. So it is not one way. Culture influences psyche, and psyche influences culture. We have to see this complex relationship, which is dynamic, which is changing, and is the meaning which is shared by the people, which is more important than mere categories, and belonging to a particular category is not enough. You need to ensure what is the meaning which is shared by the people. This is very important. When you try to understand culture, culture is not merely categorization. Culture is not merely two different addresses. No, it's not. So one has to ensure the meaning which is shared by the people. So culture has to be taken more seriously. I am one who has been advocating to take culture seriously in psychological processes, but how to take culture into account, how to see, meaning expressed in various behaviors. This is very important. Culture involves values, attitudes, meanings, practices, and they have to be understood in terms of their own properties and characteristics. I am referring to this because simply taking a scale from one culture and translating it into another culture is only partly appropriate. You need to see the terms and conditions on which a particular cultural group is functioning. So, what we need is an insider's view of culture, not spectator's view of culture, not an external view of culture, because you need to share the perspective of that culture. Only then you will be able to understand that culture, like participant observation. You have to be part of that culture. Only then you'll be able to understand that culture more effectively. Then you will have insight about that culture. So how to take into account cultural processes, cultural variables, if you want to call it, either as a context or as an independent variable or mediating variable, or dependent. It is your choice how you are using it. And you have to ensure it, particularly from local perspective. This is very, very important. Here, there are terms which are used in studies of culture, that there are ethics, that there are principles which are common to all cultures. Normally, what happens, you take a tool from one culture, from England, from France, from any place, and you try to make it familiar with your culture, and then you use it. Now, this may help to the extent that the people share that cultural perspective. It is quite possible that globalization is coming up and people are sharing, there is cultural contact. At one point in some area, there may be similarity between your view and view of the people who live in Washington or who live in Saudi Arabia. Quite possible. There are many things which are happening. There are many influences which are present everywhere. Media is one. You can see that. So how these things are happening, that has to be understood, that has to be analyzed properly. Only then you will be able to understand. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. It is very crucial to figure out these differences and learn more seriously rather than merely, comparing different addresses. That is not going to help in any way. There is one more clue about it. And those who are aspiring to do good cultural study, then they must accept one thing, that your study must involve developmental changes. Right? If you are able to show that these are the developmental changes specific to a particular culture, then you are able to really make a good case of cultural influence. It's not a momentary thing. You need to see that there are systematic changes in self-concept or in morality or in decision making or in any area of investigation. I'm just giving you one suggestion, one tip, that cultural differences should also include developmental differences. They will provide you some robust basis to assert that there are cultural differences, right? Now, the mapping of culture is something which is very crucial. And India is very rich in terms of cultural, or if you like to call, subcultural differences and processes. And it's unfortunate that we have not been able to map the perspective. Any variable, we hardly have any kind of psychological data across India. All of us know the variation in climate, in ethnicity, in caste system, in marriage, in the degree of urbanization. So a psychosocial understanding of Indian society is still not available. This resource center, where a number of colleagues are coming from different parts of India, may think of some kind of project where we can look at some of the processes and try to create a psychological map. And there are many areas where things are there. But one problem is that the studies have been done which are very sporadic, and I don't want to make any critical comment in terms of methodology and other variations which are there. I think it will be a great idea if we put our resources together, psychological, mental, intellectual, social, and of course financial, to organize such pan-Indian studies. It's very interesting to see what are the variations, even basic data about child rearing practices, or what are the parental modalities in India. What are the
I think there is a power cut from
Yeah.
sir side, so we should wait for.
Dear participants, I request you to put your questions, if any, in the chat box so that we can take up at the end of the session. Kindly bear with us in this technological glitch. Sir is expected to be back any moment. Sir, Professor Anand Prakash has joined. Good evening, sir. I once again suggest all the participants to kindly put your questions in the chat box, if any. I am very sure that we all are getting enriched with Sir's thought-provoking ideas, and our questions and further discussions are going to enrich it even further.
Sir is about to join.
Okay, sir.
Sir has already joined.
Oh,
Let me ask Ravinderji to make sir as a host, co-host.
Yes, sir.
Dear participants, sir is amongst us again, so we'll be starting any moment.
yes, sir, join. Yes, sir. Uh, Perhaps there is thunderstorm in such locality.
Oh,
That is
okay.
why there is irregular power cut. However, sir is trying, so we may wait for. Uh,
Sir is back.
oh,
Let me.
Ashwini sir, kindly
Yeah,
provide sir with the
yeah, yeah,
co-host rights.
yeah. Now, you can unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, sir.
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Ji sir,
yes, sir, you
you are
are
audible.
audible and audible as well.
So we were talking about how to take culture into account, and I made a proposition that culture can be taken, but it has to be examined carefully in terms of meanings and practices. And I also made a proposal that there is a lot to learn from different regions of India, and there should be a concerted effort, and we can think of even some small beginning where people from colleagues from different parts of India can join and look at it. So I will come to another aspect which is very crucial, which often uh, neglected in our research, and that is that what kind of approach should be taken up for study. I want to draw your attention to one major decision which today's researcher has to take, and that is whether the study has to be done following a quantitative way or following a qualitative way of doing research. This is very important decision. We know about the paradigm clash and the different kinds of paradigms of research which are being given. I would like to focus on that issue in the next lecture. But here I would like to submit to you that the goal of research dictates the kind of methodology which has to be adopted. It's not a simple choice that one should do for qualitative or one should do a study using quantitative way. There are some questions which cannot be answered by qualitative. If you want to count the number of people present, you have to count. So there are questions where quantitative approaches are more appropriate. And there are questions where qualitative approaches are more appropriate. Now, at one level, this is the choice of way of doing research. At another level, it addresses a broader issue. And I would like to mention that issue is that what is the view of reality that you entertain in your study. The reality is understood within the positivist paradigm as an external, independent reality. Now, accepting that transforms reality into a concrete physical reality. And you think that you are very powerful and you can measure, you can manipulate, you can do anything that you do. See the mindset of people who use psychological tests, who conduct experiments. They think that, well, here is one part of psychological reality. I've given the name. This is motivation, aspiration, or inspiration, whatever term that you want to use, and you create a test, and through that you translate that meaning into some kind of verbal response, and you count that and you fix it. You have fixed intelligence, you have fixed personality traits, everything. So the whole approach is to transform the non-physical reality into physical reality. And once it is transformed into physical reality in terms of numbers, you can manipulate, you can quantify, you can do whatever you want to do. It's very difficult issue that the kind of manipulations with numbers that you do, and numbers represent different constructs, how they are actually related in behavior. So you have measured frustration, you have measured performance, you have measured many things. And once you have measured, you have the scores. And those scores are considered as physical reality. And you do everything, subtraction, addition, multiplication. It is up to you how you do that. Division. All these processes are performed like what is done with physical reality. So the principles you adopt are very closely related to your concept of physical reality. I don't know whether these psychological realities follow the same kind of principle. Do they exist in the same way in real life? Do they work like that? It's very important. So a linear mode of research is done. And you hardly think about it. Once you have chosen the variables, measures, you stick to that. You hardly make any change in that. It is not allowed. It will violate assumptions of quantitative analysis. All such problems take place. So the idea of a reality that we accept is very important. If you subscribe to this view that yes, they are like things present in environment, external environment, like physical reality, then you can apply all these methods, fine. There is an alternative view which gives space for the position that reality is constructed. You accept it. That it is a particular way of looking at reality that has generated this kind of data, this kind of meaning. So you accept the responsibility of generating that. You are playing an important role in creating, understanding that meaning. So research as sense making. This is one view. And the other view is that research is mapping, measuring the reality. Measuring versus sense making. These two broad concerns are there. It is up to you how you visualize your research. I often find that researchers, when asked, they tell that I don't know, the data are before you and the tool is before you, and it is the tool which is responsible for this kind of data. You explain that. You don't think about it. It's not your responsibility. You have nothing to say about it. I think it's a wrong way to look at the whole process. You have several measures of personality, and you can have 5-factor model or 16-factor or which factor, 3-factor. And depending on that, you will get some kind of profile of personality. So your choice will determine what kind of personality is being studied. You are playing a role in choosing the language of personality, profile of personality. You can't say that, no, I am not responsible. You are measuring something independent of your tool, independent of the theory that you have adopted. Most of the analyses of personality, motivation, or any psychological property depend on the choice of a particular theory. In almost all areas, you have diverse theories. They vary in the level of analysis, they vary in terms of their suppositions and all that. So your understanding depends on this. In a major shift in our approach to psychological understanding, we are actually moving towards realization of the role of theory or the perspective or the paradigm that you have chosen in creating the reality and creating understanding of that reality. So the shift which is taking place is nothing less than transformation in the foundations of psychological knowledge. It is very important to recognize this change. And this is the beauty and this is the complexity of psychological enterprise, that you are able to create a new way and you empower people, societies, or you can empowerish. It depends on the way you present and you show the way to understand the reality. Reality is not independent of you. An Advaita Vedant person says that everything is Brahman. Now this provides a view which is very inclusive. It includes everything. And it goes to a plane where distinction between you and the other person is missing. And here you have a definition of personality that you are unique individual on this planet. By chance, everybody is called human being. Otherwise, everyone is unique. Personality is defined in terms of uniqueness. See, the whole worldview is seeing, emphasizing on differences, individual differences. You can also say that to what extent you are sharing humanity, how human you are. We don't ask this question. We ask how different you are. Differences are more important. We measure individual differences. You have factory, industry of measuring, differences, and your business grows if you are able to create another variable on which difference can be measured. So psychological testing is like this. So this is one way to look at reality. Making an effort to become more human by asserting differences or assuming commonality and moving towards commonality. Making an effort to transcend the ego limitations. That is the view held by the Indian theories, indigenous theories. That provides a different kind of agenda. You have to cut down the differences. You have to enjoy the similarities. And it can extend to a higher level where you include others, any living being. So it is the paradigmatic perspective which organizes the challenges and problems.
Perhaps again power cut or network problem maybe. Hmm.
Yes.
What do you think, Ashwini?
Yeah, there's a power cut, I think so, sir. Otherwise,
So, what should uh, we do? It is almost 6:15.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
Should we try to conclude?
Yeah, we may conclude and may request Mishra sir, if possible, then I mean around 7:30, sir may
Yes,
join and reply some questions,
sure,
answer.
sir.
So,
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We have got a number of questions from the participants.
make a summary of questions and we will ask it later. Vishwa
Mm,
sir.
yes, sir. So, shall I conclude as of now?
Yeah, please conclude. I will talk to sir. Hmm. Okay.
Sure, sure. So, dear participants, we have been very much fortunate enough that we have got key insights into the number of challenges that the field of psychology has been facing today. So, whether it is in terms of relating different levels of functioning and how we can conduct psychological research according to relating the biological, individual, and social levels of analysis, whether it be understanding the importance of culture in psychological researches, the importance of meaning making, and not considering culture as mere categorization. How important is it to have an insider's perspective of cultures and not the spectator's view of culture? How important is it that a local perspective is required? How important that we can see cultural changes in the form of developmental changes. We have also learned that there is a paradigm clash in research conduction, and the way we are going to conceptualize the reality is going to determine the kind of methodologies we take, and it would further determine the kind of psychological investigations that we make. How important is it that there is a need to make psychological investigations as more indigenous? So, on the behalf of all the participants, we are definitely going to thank Mishra sir at 7:30 on our request. Uh, as of now,